KCAA.
I shot the sheriff, but I did not shoot.
And now, it's For the People with Judge Herb Dodell.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Judge Herb Dodell, and the show is called For the People. The reason the show is called For the People is because it's for the people. What we're going to do over the course of the shows that we have is tell you a little bit about how the legal system works from the inside, as opposed to what you watch on TV and what you hear about the way things work. They don't always work that way at all. So we're going to talk about things like small claims court. We're going to talk about restraining orders. We're going to talk about landlord and tenant. We're going to talk about what happens to you at 3 o'clock in the morning when you get arrested for driving under the influence. We're going to talk to you about general civil litigation and just about the system as it works from the inside. So let's start by telling you a little bit about who I am so you'll understand somewhat about the experience and the qualifications that go into it. I was appointed in 2008 as a judge pro tem, and I'll tell you all about that in a few minutes. But let's start from the beginning. I come from a little town called Eastchester, New York. Population around 6,500, including the cats and the dogs, I think. In fact, I went back there for my 60th high school reunion last week, and the place hasn't changed. Everything looks the same, except the front of our house is a little different. The people kind of moderned it up nicely. So I went to Eastchester High School and graduated in 1957. That's why we had our 60th anniversary. Went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, also known as Pitt, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Graduated in 1961 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, pre-law. And then I went into law school because when I was a little boy, all my friends, my family, my relatives, everybody said, you know, you'll make a great lawyer because you got a big mouth. Not only do you have a big mouth, but you love to argue. So you're a natural for this job. So I guess I was predetermined to be a lawyer. And I looked at it as, you know, lawyers always were presented in a very positive way, not like they are now. Although I must say, a lot of these lawyer jokes are really pretty accurate. Sometimes we get the reputations that we deserve. Anyway, I went to Brooklyn Law School, the Harvard of New York City, and graduated in 1964 with a LLB degree, and then I obtained a Juris Doctor, which made my mother very happy because then she could say she had a son who was a doctor. Not that it was real, but made her feel good. And in the 60s, I said, you know what? I don't want to be living here in New York. It's too much cement. I'm going to come out to California and see how the real world is. Drove out here with $600 in my pocket and packed up my little Corvair convertible and came to California because there were blue-eyed women and great beaches. So I had been involved in law enforcement in New York while I was going through law school, and came out to California, got a job with ABC, which I worked for in New York, ABC, the Channel 7. They transferred me out here, and I was working as a kind of a production coordinator for the local Channel 7 station. But basically what I was doing was writing what was going to be shown on TV that night. So not a very productive job, but I did time some of the shows. Job didn't last very long. They finally realized they could get anybody else to write what's going to be on, because I was taking it off from the TV guide. Not much creativity involved. So I went to work for a production company called 4-Star Television, and they had some shows on the air then. Most of you are too young to remember them, but there was a show called The Big Valley. I was involved in that. I was the lawyer, the in-house lawyer, as opposed to the outhouse lawyer, and did mostly contract writing and drafting and transactional things, making television deals and things of that nature, labor relations, and whatever. Then became a business affairs person there. It was a great job. I enjoyed it, and they were bought out by another company, leaving me without employment. So I said, you know what? I loved law enforcement. I'm going to do something about that. I was getting too old to be a trainee cop, so I went into the district attorney's office. I was hired as a deputy district attorney by the late DA Evelyn Younger and worked what they call a county run. So I got to go to all kinds of different courts, whether it was Torrance or Long Beach or Inglewood or whatever it was, prosecuting cases and loving it. Great, great job. But they didn't pay very much. And I was spending more money on gas and stuff to drive to West Covina than I was getting paid. And with a decent lifestyle, New York lifestyle, wasn't lasting very long. So I got a call one day from a friend of mine from law school who lived in London. And he said, Warner Brothers has just gotten purchased by a big New York conglomerate. And they offered me a job as the number 2 person there dealing with business affairs. And since you have experience in all of that, having been involved with the TV companies and the network, how'd you like the job? Because I don't want to move. I love it here in London. And he was right. How could you not love London? So he said, well, call this guy and they'll talk to you. So I went through the whole routine. I met all of the various people, the board, and yada, 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 as Jerry Seinfeld would say. And I got the job. So I came in as director of business affairs, and my boss, who was in charge of the whole thing, got sick. And he was bedridden for 6 months. So I basically was running the studio at age 27. And it was kind of interesting because I never had to pick up a check, and even my car was in a movie. If you saw the movie Bullet, that red little car, the Mustang, that was my car. They wrecked it. And I actually had Steve McQueen was right next door. We shared a bathroom, and we didn't get along that great, as a matter of fact, because when he would use the bathroom, he'd lock the door from his side, and I couldn't get in. And when I wanted to go, I would show him, who the hell you think you are. I locked the door from my side, so he couldn't get in. But I did put in some time there and basically ran the physical studio, including supervision of the music department. And we had some labels that were part of the music department. Did labor relations, supervised the legal department, made the deals, acquired literary properties and the like. It was a great job. And then one day, the company was getting bought out, and I'm looking around, and a guy that I was playing tennis with used to say to me, why don't you practice law? I said, yeah, I don't want to do that. Entertainment law is boring. He said, no, you could put movie packages together. You can do stuff. I said, okay, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So I left the studio and became a partner in an entertainment law firm, put movie deals together for a while, and then went into civil and criminal litigation, which I did for a long time. I've been practicing for 53 years, actually, and I've tried 99 jury trials. People say, why don't you get the 100th one? I said, I can't seem to get that 100th one. But I tried 99 Superior Court jury trials, civil and criminal, plaintiff and defendant, state and federal, to a verdict. And during that time, I got to see what life is really like. And much of what we're going to talk about during these series of shows can be found in my book, which is called, I got a copy right here, From the Trench to the Bench. So the trench is really what it's like from the lawyer's standpoint. And the purpose of the book, and the purpose actually in the show too, is to tell you how the system really works. The legal system is very, very complicated. It's not what you learn in the books. It's what you learn in the street. Better lawyers, in my opinion, are not the people who went to Harvard. It was the people who went to school who learned how to do it. What's going to happen? How do you pick a lawyer? How do you handle a case? How do you get retained? How do you become a judge? So after all those, we'll be back shortly. This is Judge Herb Dodell, and the show is called For the People.
KCAA.
Herb Dodell is a lawyer and a judge for the people. Having served as a Superior Court judge, presiding over more than 9,000 cases, he has witnessed firsthand how complicated and corrupt the legal system can be. His goal is to show how things really work in the legal system so that people can navigate the legal system in the best way for them. Many people often feel marginalized by the legal system and are uninformed about how to proceed when unfortunate circumstances arise in their life. Judge Herb will pull back the curtain, lift the veil, so people can truly understand their rights, have access to top legal personnel that they can trust, and have knowledge about how things work so they can make better choices. Judge Herb isn't just knowledgeable. His integrity and spiritual values are truly what make him different. He cares about democratizing access and information for all and desires to turn on the light so the people, you, can benefit. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
Welcome back to the show For the People. This is Judge Herb Dodell, and we're going to talk about how the legal system really works from the inside, the perspective from the lawyer, who obviously has financial motivation most of the time, versus the judges who don't have any real motivation. People always say to me, do you rule in favor of people you like as opposed to people you don't like? Well, the answer is some may, but not me. To me, it makes no difference. In fact, I remember a case in Beverly Hills that I was sitting in, and this lady was so annoying. She was really an annoyance. In fact, the bailiff had to keep her quiet a couple of times because she kept speaking out and yelling and whatever. But she won. Why did she win? Because she was right. And that makes a big difference. And do judges always do what they want to do? The answer to that is no, and I'm going to tell you a story about that shortly. But before we go on, I want to thank my very, very dear friend, Seven Aurelius, who wrote the music for the show. He's a Grammy Award-winning guy, and when he heard I was doing this, he said, let me write something for you. So the music, I want to attribute the credit to my dear friend, Seven Aurelius. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the continuation of what happened from the law business to the judicial profession. It was about almost 10 years now. I had lunch with a very good friend of mine who turned out to be very important in my life, who was a Superior Court judge in Van Nuys. We were having lunch one day, and he says, we're overwhelmed. This is 2008. The budget was all over us, and they couldn't afford to hire any more judges. There were 4 judges short. Everybody was complaining they couldn't handle the caseloads that they had because there was just not enough judges to go around. So I said, well, can I help you in some way? He says, yeah, you can. I said, what's that? What can I do? He says, well, we have a little way of maybe using you as a temporary judge. And you would be a regular judge, but you'd be appointed by the presiding judge. You'd have to be trained. You have to go through the system. You have to be vetted by the entire Superior Court. They pass around a little information. Anybody got nothing good to say about you? And then I thought I'd think about all the judges that I pissed off over the years. But nobody said a bad word, at least that I know of. And I was appointed by the then presiding judge to be a Superior Court judge, what they call pro tem, meaning I'm like the substitute teacher. In the beginning, it was once or twice here and there, but the more I did it, the more I liked it, the more I wanted to give back to the community. The law business had been very good to me, put my kids through school. My wife was living good. I said, you know what? We got to do something meaningful. What do I know? I don't know how to fix plumbing. I don't know anything about electric. All I know is if you need to change the bulb, you don't ask me because I break the bulb. So I said to Judge James Cato, my very dear friend, I'll do it. And I did. And so over the years, it's about 9 years now, I guess, I've handled over 10,000 cases. That's small claims, that's restraining orders, and that's Jerry Springer without the chairs, by the way. I mean, that's entertainment time. And then I did landlord-tenant, meaning not representing anybody, but being the judge to determine whether you get evicted or not. And we're going to talk about a lot of the cases, because one of the things I wanted to do in the book is to talk about real cases. So everything in the book is real. There's no made-up cases. They're all true stories. Some of them get a chuckle, and I think you will get a chuckle out of some of them. And I want to tell you one before I forget. Great story. Small claims court. Lady comes in and she says, I'm suing for $4,000. I got a bad check from somebody. Now, what happens in small claims court, and I'm going to go through all the rules of small claims court with you as we go through the shows, so you can see what you should do and what you shouldn't do and what you could reasonably expect. I can't speak for my colleagues because everybody's different. And I can't talk about law in Louisiana or in Idaho because I've only visited there. So I'm going to talk about California law, and I'm going to talk about New York law because I have licenses in those states and have practiced in both of those states. So I said, okay, where's the defendant? The defendant was not there. So in small claims court, if the defendant is not present, it isn't automatic that the plaintiff wins, by the way. Just because the other side's not there, you can't jump up and down like it's a traffic ticket and the cop didn't show up. It's not the same. And so we have to hold what's called a prove-up. Prove-up means you ask a couple of questions of the plaintiff if you have the time. Usually you have to make the time. And you find out whether or not there's any merit to the case. So I said, okay, you're suing for $4,000 on a bad check. What do you do for a living? She says, I'm an exotic dancer. I said, oh, really? And what do you do? She says, well, I go to people's houses and I dance for them. I said, oh, and how much do you get paid for this dance? $250 an hour. I said, more than some lawyers. I said, okay, well, what happened? She says, well, I went to this guy's house. It was a construction company owner. And I danced for him. And he then said, look, I don't have any cash. And I don't take credit cards. So he says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a check. And I'll give you a big tip. So she says, okay, I'll do that. So she takes the check, and of course it was a stiff check, no pun intended. And the reality was California law provides that if you are the recipient of a bad check, non-sufficient funds check, if that happens, you can get triple the amount of the damages, the amount that's on that check. So for the $1,000 check that she had from him, and that must have been a hell of a dance. I think it was a horizontal mambo personally, but I didn't know what was going on. She got a check, it bounced, and she was entitled to $3,000 or three times the amount of the check. So what do you think I should have done? We'll pause here for a second. Give you a think. Should I give her the money?
Yes.
I did give her the money. Why did I give her the money? What do you think I gave her the money?
She was hot.
I'm gonna ask my producer Gary Garver to make a comment.
Well, I mean, she got a bad check. You know what I mean? And she was promised. The guy didn't show up for court. I mean, you got to usually show up for court, right? I mean, that's one of the things you have to do.
Yeah.
B, she seemed probably credible to you, right?
Well,
you gave her them, or was she just hot, Judge? I mean, did that have anything to do with it?
I don't sound chauvinistic, but $250 an hour, to shake the booty was not where I was going. But the reality was, I said to myself, as I was sitting listening to the story, I was saying to myself, you know what? I don't know what happened over there. All I know is he gave her a bad check. The law says you get a bad check if you give notice. And by the way, if you're confronted with this is some free legal advice. I'm not calling it advice. Some information.
Information. Yes,
information. No advice.
By the way, this is very important information because we discussed this off the air about this because I received a rubber check too a few months ago, and I didn't know this law was in effect. Go ahead and tell us.
Well, you got to give 30 days notice in writing.
Right, you have to write out some. You got to write a letter to the person that sent you the bad check.
An
right?
email is probably good enough.
Is it an email? Good enough?
Any
Okay,
kind of
I didn't know that.
It's called notice. You just have to give notice.
Give notice.
And so I said, what she did there, none of my business. Were they really doing what I think they were doing? So what? They made a contract. And as you're going to hear as we go through some aspects of the law, what a contract really is. Contract is an agreement between two or more people that they're going to do something. It's called consideration. One party is going to do something in exchange for a promise or performance by the other party. It's called consideration. And you have to have that in every agreement. And in this agreement, and it was an agreement, the check was payment pursuant to the terms of that agreement, there was consideration.
Can I ask you a question? Does it matter if it's oral agreement or written agreement?
There's very little difference between an oral agreement and a written agreement. That's a great question because people ask me that a lot of times. The major difference is there's a different statute of limitations. An oral agreement in California and in New York is a 2-year statute of limitations. What is a statute of limitations? It means you have to file a lawsuit within that period of time or it's barred by the statute. And so written agreements are 4 years. That makes a difference. Also, when you have an oral agreement, you don't have anything physical to look at. Some judges place great emphasis on the fact that something is in writing as opposed to it's just oral. But if you've got credible witnesses who have admissible testimony, and we'll talk about admissible testimony as we go along, and they're credible, that's as good as a written contract. Because you oftentimes find contracts are ambiguous. What's the word ambiguous mean? It means it's capable of more than one meaning. And the law has what's called rules of construction. So if something is ambiguous, well, how do you determine that? Well, you look at the circumstances, you look at the language, and you determine who wrote the document, if it's a document. And there's a construction rule that says you look at the person who drafted it, it's going to be construed against them because they wrote it. And so the difference between an oral and written agreement at the end of the day probably doesn't make much difference. Some oral agreements have turned into big judgments, and some written agreements.
I mean, because the reason I ask is because I was sued on a people's court, and the guy, we had no written agreement, but he stated in the court that we had an oral agreement where I would pay him to be a guest on the show. And lo and behold, that's all. It was just me versus him as far as like that goes. You know what I mean? It was just he said versus he said, and the judge ruled in favor of me because there was no signed agreement, written agreement. That's why I'm asking how important that is.
Well, I'm going to tell you it's something that's probably the most important thing about small claims court. And I love small claims court. I'm sitting in small claims court now. That's my assignment. And I can tell you that I do a little speech when I come out, because most of the people there are lay people. They haven't got a clue as to what they're going to look at. Most of them have never been there, except for what we call the frequent filers. I always fumble over frequent filers and filers that are there collecting. You know, those people are there all the time.
Right.
But for the most part, the average guy and gal has no clue what's going to go on. This is truly frontier justice.
Yes.
There's one person who's going to decide this. And by the way, something everybody should know. Plaintiffs, those are the people who are filing a lawsuit against somebody else, against the defendants who are the party responding, do not have a right of appeal. So they get 1 day in court, and you get 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. I had a calendar in Inglewood. I had 86 cases in 1 day.
Wow.
There was no way. I walked in, I looked at these files, I said, there's no conceivable way I'm going to do 86 cases. But it's kind of illusory because a lot of the cases end up in continuances or no-shows and minimal.
Right.
So we take a look at that. And after the break, I'm going to tell you a little bit about small claims court, what you can expect and what you can hope for.
Cool.
This is For the People, Judge Herb Dodell.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
In his book, From the Trench to the Bench, Judge Herb Dodell demystifies the legal system, including both civil and criminal, the lawyers, the judges, and the process. As a judge, former deputy district attorney, and criminal defense attorney, he knows the legal system. He has the inside information that you need to pick a lawyer, and he's here to give it to you. No matter what you're facing that makes you think you may need a lawyer, Judge Herb will shed valuable light on your situation and reveal your best options and many secrets of how the judicial system actually works. To find out more about how the legal system really works, you can get your copy of Judge Herb Dodell's eye-opening book, From the Trench to the Bench, at Amazon.com.
Welcome back to For the People. This is Judge Herb Dodell, and we're going to talk about small claims court this afternoon as one of the popular subjects because it's an interesting place to be. One of the most important facts is no lawyers. No lawyers. So I tell people, and I've been telling people for years, that if you got a dispute and it's less than the jurisdictional amount, and I'm going to tell you what that is in a minute, you're better off in small claims court. You're not paying any lawyers to give you advice, some of which is not always that right, and bills, and you get a chance to tell your story. And what's interesting, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, Gary, I do a little speech when I start off.
Yeah, what do you tell them?
First I welcome them to small claims. See, I'm really the male Judge Judy.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, except her cases are dramatizations and mine are real.
Well, by the way, I just want to let you know, because I got asked this question a few times when I went on People's Court. Is it a real case? Is it a real court? It actually is a real court, a real decision and a real verdict. I mean, it's filed in the Superior Court, correct? I mean,
well, the way it works, from what I understand, is that the company that produces the show agrees to pay the judgment. If there's a judgment against the defendant, they pick it up. So
exactly.
The plaintiff's going to get paid, and the defendant's not going to. It's not going to cost them anything.
Right. I mean, when they approached me, they said, you know, if the verdict goes against you, which I was the defendant in this case, they said that they'll pick it up. So I was like, it's a win-win, you know, and I got a free trip to New York City.
And what's really interesting, and you mentioned that, I was sitting in Beverly Hills in the small claims court there, and I was talking to some guy, and the case was bogus. It was so I said to him, well, this really doesn't make any sense. I said, why are you here? He says, because the show was shot in Chicago, and that's where I'm from, and I wanted a trip. He was candid. He was honest about it. But that's why he filed the lawsuit. I'll tell you all about filing lawsuits in a minute, but I want to get back to what I usually say to the people.
Yeah, let's hear what you usually say.
And I tell them that most of the cases, truly, most of the cases are decided on something called the burden of proof. People, what's the burden of proof? Well, there are three different types of burdens of proof. A burden of proof in a civil case is by what's called preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, 51%. Then there's the criminal burden of proof standard, which is beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. That's, 98%. There's always going to be some little modicum amount of doubt, but it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And in between is a third burden of proof most people don't know about, called clear and convincing evidence. And when we start to talk about restraining orders, that's the burden of proof. What it means is if at the end of a trial, the judge doesn't know, not sure, verdict is for the party not having the burden of proof. And I tell them, you know what? You don't know what's going to happen here. You got no right of appeal if you're the plaintiff. You want to take a crapshoot? You have no idea what's going to come out of this. And here's a true story. I've told this story at least 500 times. Every time I take the bench, I tell the same story. My bailiff closes his eyes and puts his hands over his ears.
Not again.
I'm going to hear the same story over again.
Holy moly.
True story. Really a true story. It was a couple that came in, was suing a private school to return the tuition for their daughter. She apparently wasn't working out in the school, wasn't wasn't fitting what they were hoping to get. So they wanted the tuition back, but there was no agreement to give the tuition back if anything was wrong. I said to them, go out in the hall. Try to settle this. Settlement is the best way you can handle any of these cases because you eliminate the risk. And if you're a defendant, you don't want to have a judgment against you. It screws up your credit. So I always encourage people to go out there. And in fact, we have the benefit in the court where I sit now of having a mediator. Now, a mediator is a person who's experienced in the law, takes the ego out of it because most cases involve the ego. They almost always involve the ego. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who cares? That's what goes into almost all the cases. And his name is John Howard. He's wonderful. He settled a lot of cases. So
what court is this in?
Ventura.
Judge? Oh, Ventura. Okay, you're in Ventura. Okay.
So I said, go out in the hall and see what you guys can do. Now I covered 15 courts in L.A. County when I was doing it on a more full-time basis than I'm doing it now. And I covered all kinds of different matters in different courts. But I always preferred small claims. It's real justice. It's really, you do the right thing, and there's no side issues. It's really calling it like you see it. So I sent them out in the hall. They come back in. They said, no, we couldn't settle it. Okay, let's try the case. Plaintiff testifies. Defendant testifies. How do you think I ruled?
Probably for the school.
I did, for the school. And the reason being there was no agreement to return, and there was no promise that things were going to work out for the student. There was no justification for requiring him to give any of the money back. So at the end of the day, getting ready to pack it up for the day, my bailiff, whose name was Takashima, he said to me, I was out in the hall because we took a little recess, and he could go out. He always kind of liked to watch what was going on outside, and he was a busybody, and he really always was sticking his nose wherever it could be. Terrific guy. So he comes back and he says, I heard the conversation out there. So what happened? He says, the defendant, school, offered to pay half. Now, the jurisdictional limit is $10,000 in California. It's different in other states, but it's $10,000 if you're an individual suing in California, maximum. You could get a bigger judgment, but you have to remit the excess over that amount because you can't get more than $10,000. Corporations are limited to $5,000. So if you're a corporation, that's all you're going to get. And frequent filers, they're limited to $2,500. So I said, well, what? He said, yeah, they offered to give him $5,000. They turned it down.
Wow.
So they came in, they got a zero, and no appeal. So what's the story? What's the motto of the story? The story is settle the cases. Eliminate the exposure, eliminate the risk, put the ego aside. Most everything is decided in the world on something called cause and effect. You do the right thing, right things happen to you. Do the wrong thing, you get controlled chaos, right? To quote Gary Garver, right? Controlled
Monday through
chaos.
Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. on KCAA, yes.
No charge for the plug.
Thank you.
But the reality is that we try to settle those cases as best we can. So people always want to know, and this is the how to do it part, because the show is going to have, this is only our first show, we're going to have guests. We're going to talk about subjects that they know best. Like we'll have a person who comes in and talks to you about how do you collect the judgment. You won. Congratulations. You got a $10,000 judgment against somebody who's got $4. Where are you going?
The Vinny.
With
Vinny in the bat.
I should mention I used to represent some of those people.
I bet.
In the early years I did. I could tell you stories about that.
I hear you.
That was great. It was good fellas. Here I was, a kid from a small town, and I'm hanging out with these guys, with Vinny and the guys,
Yeah.
And the reality is that these people really know what they're doing. Collection is very important, and there's a way to do it. So if you don't know and you just won, in fact, somebody called me the other day and said, I just got this judgment. How do I collect it? I said, well, this is what you do. There are various routines and regulations and procedures that you got to follow. But if you do it, you got a good chance of collecting it. I once grabbed computers from an insurance company, had a judgment against them. I used to sue insurance companies. That was my forte.
Good for you.
Hey, I once gave a lecture, and it was called "The Only Float in Town Isn't at the Rose Parade." The insurance companies, and I haven't got any biases against the insurance companies anymore, because I found out over the years, listening to some of those cases as a judge, they're right a lot of the time.
Yeah.
People take advantage of the situation, and they're following the rules, and I don't have any real negative feelings about insurance companies anymore. But I used to sue them on a very regular basis. And I got a judgment against them on a case, and they weren't paying it. So I hired the sheriff or the marshal. It was up in north of San Francisco. I got an order signed. It's called a writ of execution. Not at San Quentin. It's a writ of it's a different execution.
Right.
And they went into this insurance company. I won't mention their names because they got much better over the years. And he grabbed all the computers. I got a call, frantic, from some local, or maybe it was a general counsel. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just collecting the judgment." Blah, 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 blah. I said, "Well, you owe whatever it is. You'll have a check in the morning. Leave the computers." I did, and I got a check. So there are ways to do it, and that's part of the practical experience that you get as a street lawyer. You learn how to do it. So we're going to have guests. We'll have somebody here who's going to talk about personal injury cases. You got rear-ended on the freeway. Now you want to do something about it. You heard all these people. You see all these signs that say, "I got $4 million from my cousin Harry." And, they don't say, some of these people have never been in a courtroom. But the bottom line, they got big billboards, or the back of the bus, or the bus stop. Is that the guy or the gal that you hire? Not usually. So we're going to have a really top-of-the-line, major top-of-the-line personal injury lawyer. How much he's going to be willing to share, I don't know. We're pretty good friends. I'm going to push him into telling him how it really works, because it does turn out, without changing the subject, from small claims, because I hear a lot of personal injury cases in small claims court when they're seeking damages less than $10,000. So I hear them, liability and damages. And he's going to tell you, it's all about the experts, the doctors, all of whom in the personal injury business have somewhat of a motive. In the reports that come out, in fact, as I'm talking, I'm thinking of some of these stories that I remember. I was listening to a case, and it was a husband and wife. And what happens is the lawyers bail out because they can't be in small claims court. But they sit in the back of the room, or they send somebody, or whatever it is. And I'm reading the medical. I must have read probably 10,000 medical reports over my career. And I'm reading the report for the husband, and okay, it's all typical what they call soft tissue. And I'm reading it, and I have a pretty good sense of what the range should be. And then I read the report for the wife, and it refers to him, and it's the exact same report. All he did was change the
name.
him, not even the name. Him and her, him was interchangeable. So I knew this was a bogus, it was a build-up, nonsense case. It was like a 3-mile-an-hour rear ender. Although I did win one of those when I was practicing. She had 5 priors, but I had brought in evidence that the night before she had carried a 50-pound cauldron of soup and had no problem with her back. And then I went to Pier 1, and I bought a couple of glasses, one of which was cracked. Cracked. I actually shopped for it.
Oh my God.
So go to trial. I got a jury. This was in San Jose. I wrap up the glasses under a towel, very dramatic. I pull the towel off, and I have a little hammer, right? So I tap the glass that's cracked on the crack, and it just shatters, right? Then I tap the other one, nothing happens. So I argued what's called in the law the thin-skulled plaintiff. What is a thin-skulled plaintiff? It means you take the plaintiff as you find him. Some people are more susceptible to greater injuries with minor impact than others would be, and I had argued she may have had prior accidents, but she was more susceptible. That was her big problem, and we won. Great judge. He went to the Court of Appeals. So more to follow. So after the break,
stories.
we'll be back to For the People. This is Judge Herb Dodell.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
Did you ever meet a lawyer that was for the people? Someone who had the best interests of the people at heart? Herb Dodell has been a lawyer for more than 50 years and has been a Superior Court judge for 9 years, having presided over more than 9,000 cases. In this show, he will reveal the secrets of how things really work in the legal system, so you can maximize your position and benefit most when you're in trouble and need someone on your side to simplify the process for you. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
Okay, welcome back to For the People. This is Judge Herb Dodell. So if you have any questions, because we're going to talk about a lot of different subjects here over a long period of time, hopefully, drop me a note. I'm happy to respond. I don't give any legal advice. Obviously, there's no attorney-client relationship. This is called a disclaimer. And you're not my client. But I'm happy to share my experience with you and give you some guidelines as to what you might expect. And when I was writing the book, one of the reasons was I said to myself, you know, most people are frightened of the legal system because they don't know anything about it. And the expectation isn't healthy because they don't know how much it's going to cost, what's their exposure, how long is it going to take, and then the egos take over. I'm going to show that son of a bitch that I'm right, and you end up aggravating yourself. I had somebody come in and said they lost 8 pounds and they can't sleep at night because they got this lawsuit going. And I thought, well, why don't we tell the people what it's really like, what really happens, and what you could reasonably expect, including the selection of the lawyers. And we'll talk about lawyers and fees and how they work during the course of one of these shows. We'll get to it. There's the hourly and then there's the contingency, and people think contingency is great because you're not paying anything up front. Not always so great. We'll talk about that as well. So I thought, well, if we tell people how it really works and what reasonably could be expected and how they could use their own inners to ultimately dictate the outcome of the case, because you can, you have control. It takes away some of the uncertainty. The one thing that's absolutely certain in the law business is it's uncertain. I used to tell people, okay, what's your jury going to look like? And they'd say, well, I have no idea. I said, that's exactly the point, isn't it? What's your judge going to do? You know who that judge is, he or she? What are they going to do? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, you don't know is the reason why you settle cases. I can honestly say that of the 99 I tried, I didn't count the ones that I was prosecuting, just since private practice. Even the ones when I was a DA, I lost a couple when I was a DA that I said, how could you lose that? I lost a drunk driving case. The guy blew a 3.4. I mean, the guy was nearly dead, and the jury found him not guilty. I walked out. I said, how did I lose that? But the bottom line is, you win some, you say to yourself, wow, what a break. I got lucky. And you lose some, and you say, how did that happen? And so the smartest thing to do is either mediate it and try to get it settled that way, or just settle it. Because that eliminates all the risk, it eliminates all the time, and it eliminates all the uncertainty. And the anxiety goes away along with it if you recognize you're in it for a reason.
I remember when I was sued by this guy for being a guest on the show, and he sued me right before the holidays. And for the whole holidays, I was completely a basket case. I couldn't sleep. It was really disturbing that somebody would sue me, and I knew for a fact that I never promised to pay him one time to be a guest on the show. I mean, if he would have asked me, I would have just said, hey, you know what, I can't pay you. You know what I mean? And but it did really upset me, and the anxiety. You're speaking about anxiety and all that. It really bothered me for like a good month, man. I mean,
well,
it's disturbing.
It's the uncertainty of it, for number one.
Yeah.
But more than the uncertainty is it arouses all of the ego issues, which is revenge. It arouses fear. It arouses all of those kinds of things which are not good for your health. One of the reasons I wrote the book, and I put a spiritual twist into it throughout the book, if anybody who reads it, is that we do have the ability to control things. And everything is predetermined, but we get a chance to change things. The way we behave ourselves to others and the lack of hostility comes back as a blessing at the end of the day. The more hostile you are, and I fought with lawyers for years. I fought with one lady lawyer for 25 years. We fought, and we really didn't like each other. And nasty. She worked for one of the insurance companies. And then when the senior partner died at that insurance company, for some reason or other, we got put together, and I hadn't spoken to her in years. And she started the conversation with, I owe you an apology. I said, why do you owe me an apology? She says, I was pretty nasty to you all these years. I said, you know what? I was pretty nasty to you too. And let's call it a day, Olivia. We're going to be good friends. And let's go to lunch. We went to lunch. Now we're inseparable friends.
Wow.
We talk to each other all the time.
That's great.
You can eliminate the hostility as a litigant. It makes an enormous difference. So let's go back to small claims for a minute because I don't want to lose the continuity of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. It's a very simple process. And why is it better? Because it's faster. There are no lawyers. And you get a chance to tell your story without the rules of evidence. So when I give my speech, I tell them hearsay is admissible in this court. Wow, what does that mean? What is hearsay? Hearsay is generally an out-of-court statement or writing that is being offered for the truth of the matter and the person is not there to be cross-examined. Generally not admissible. Admissible in small claims, and believe it or not, admissible in restraining order cases. Because I've handled hundreds of hearings in small claims, in restraining order cases, and the burden of proof, by the way, is higher in that court than it is in civil court. The reality is that it's a nasty business, and people are there for sometimes for craziest, silly reasons. Neighbors, your apples off your tree fell on my property, and I want you to cut the tree down. I mean, you can't imagine. I could tell you stories, and I will during the course of these shows. I'm going to tell you some fabulous, really, truly fabulous stories. I got to tell you one before we close for the day. Family came in. I was sitting in Long Beach that time, and they wanted a restraining order against their neighbors for killing their cat. So I said, okay, do you have an autopsy report? I was just, because I want to talk about humor in a minute. I've been reprimanded for having humor in the court. And I think that's wrong. You should have humor in the
Absolutely.
court. So I said, well, let me see it. So bailiff brings it up, and I look at it. If you've seen Judge Judy, you see the bailiff walks up, hands you the thing, So I read it, and it says that the cat was killed by blunt force trauma, probably auto. So I said to the defendant, respondent, I said, well, what happened to the cat? Well, we came home. The cat was laying on our front lawn, dead. We wanted to do the right thing, so we put it in a bag, and we walked across next door and dropped it on the front lawn. I said, anybody got any cameras? Did anybody take a picture of any? Is anybody seeing it? Nobody know nothing about nothing. So I said to the petitioner, I said, what do you want? You want me to give you a restraining order they won't kill your next cat? I mean, how silly. Because if somebody does you damage, especially when you're thinking about restraining orders, you have remedies. Those are civil remedies. Nuisance, battery, all those things apply. So don't waste everybody's time in Superior Court, where we are, dealing with things that are really inconsequential. Although I must have had several serious sex cases, rape and child molestation. I've had those. I was granted, I once asked my clerk, what percentage do you think I grant? And changing the subject. She says, you grant about 5% of the ones that come in. So it shouldn't be that easy. And for me, you got to go a long way before we ruin people's lives by sticking a restraining order on them that carries with them for the rest of their lives, even though the restraining order may not be there. It's on the record. And I once called 2 presidents of companies. I didn't call them. I had the clerk call them. They hear a judge's call and they say they take the call. They don't know what you're calling about, but they take the call. I said, look, I'm not going to mention your name of your company. It's all anonymous. What do you do if you see a restraining order on the record? It's public record, you know. It goes into what's called the California law, legal and communications, telecommunications system. He said, we don't hire him. So why not? He said, we're on notice that this person, somebody, some neutral, has decided this person is not stable. So we don't hire him. So these restraining orders on your name are horrible. Sometimes you can't even leave the country because Canada won't let you in if you have a restraining order on you.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
Didn't know that.
So back to the smoke. I love small claims.
Let me ask you one question about small claims court. How easy is it to file in small claims? Can you just walk into the courtroom and file and all that? Okay.
Yeah, you walk in, you pay the fee. Sometimes you can even get a fee waiver. You don't have to pay anything.
Okay.
And you go in and you file the papers. You get a date. Send out, make sure the other side is served. Served meaning notified. There are several ways to do that. Number one is personal service, which is always the best. And you get an affidavit or a proof of service from the bailiff or from the marshal or the sheriff. Second way is substituted service, which is you go there, you leave it with somebody who looks like they belong there, and you mail a copy and you nail a copy on the wall, on the door. And then the third one is called publication, which is the least successful of all of them. You get them served, they get a date. If they don't show up, and I want to talk about this next week, if they don't show up and the plaintiff gets a verdict, the defendant cannot appeal. They can make a motion to vacate it, to set it aside because they didn't get served or they were in Europe. I had a case like that. They came in and showed the passport. They were in Europe. How could they be served? So the reality is that if you don't show up, you get a default against you, you are done. There are some procedures that could be used for the court to reconsider, but in all the ones that I've had, that people have asked me to reconsider, I don't think I've ever granted one.
Yeah, no, you have to show up in court. I mean,
you got to show up.
I mean, whether it's small claims or whatever. I mean, traffic, anything, you got to show up. Otherwise, you get a warrant, and
well, no warrants in small.
Well,
claims.
not small claims, but you get a judgment against you.
But I do issue warrants in cases where there's an examination of a debtor and the debtor doesn't show up, because if you want to find out how to collect your money, you take the oral examination of the debtor, you get an order, and they make them come in and testify as to what they have, what they own, where they owned it, when they sold it, whatever it is. And if they don't show up, I give them one free shot. We notify them they didn't show up. I issue a warrant for their arrest. I set bail, and I hold the warrant for the new date. If they don't come up the second time, they're going to spend the weekend. And it's for strange reason, I never could quite figure this out, people tend to get arrested on Friday afternoons. I don't know why it is. Friday afternoon.
And spend the whole weekend.
Try to make bail on Friday afternoon.
It ain't going to happen.
But we'll talk about bail when we get to criminal law, because we're going to talk about criminal law during some of them as well.
Great.
So
congratulations, Judge. I love your show.
it's a kick. It really is. You talked me into it.
I did talk you into this show.
Anyway,
kicking and screaming.
This is called For the People. I'm Judge Herb Dodell. If you have any questions, please let me know. We will try, I use the word try, to respond to you. If you're crazy, don't call. See you next week.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
I'm Tom Busby, CNBC. Target is giving shoppers and its workers a bit of a break this Thanksgiving. Stores will open on Turkey Day at 6 p.m. local time and close just a few hours later at midnight or even earlier. Meantime, JCPenney says it'll open doors at 2 p.m. local time on Thanksgiving and stay open around the clock till 10 at night on Black Friday. On Wall Street, new record closing highs today for all the major averages. Despite modest gains, the Dow added 9, the Nasdaq up 22. That's on word that mergers are back. Disney in talks with rival media giant 21st Century Fox about buying its Hollywood studio and other assets. And chipmaker Broadcom has offered to buy rival Qualcomm in a deal that could be worth upwards of $130 billion. And a shakeup in Saudi Arabia is boosting oil prices everywhere. An anti-corruption crackdown led to a number of arrests of top energy officials there that sent oil spiking to a more than 2-year high today. Tom Busby, CNBC.
I'm Nick Soboleski, a Select Quote agent with a true story that could save you hundreds of dollars a year. A woman named Linda just called. Her husband, Ray, has a $300,000 group life insurance policy, but is changing jobs and can't take it with him. Well, I shopped the many highly rated term life insurance companies we represent and found Ray, who is 41 and takes medication to control his cholesterol, a 10-year, $500,000 policy for under $27 a month. That's almost twice the coverage for less than half of what he had paid. If SelectQuote hasn't shopped for your life insurance, you're probably paying too much.
For your free quote, call 800-445-6363. That's 800-445-6363. 800-445-6363. Or go to SelectQuote.com. Since 1980, shop, you save.
Get full details on the example policy at selectquote.com/commercials. Or price could vary depending on your health, issuing company, and other factors. Not available in all states.
NBC News Radio, I'm Monica Nelson. First responders are being praised for helping to save lives in the deadly mass shooting at a Texas church yesterday. The shooter behind the massacre was in a domestic dispute with his mother-in-law.
We can't go into details about that domestic situation that is continuing to be vetted and thoroughly investigated, but we want to get that out there that this was not racially motivated. It wasn't over religious beliefs.
That's Texas DPS Regional Director Freeman Martin.
The suspect's mother-in-law attended this church. We know that he had made threatening texts from him.
The mother-in-law had attended the church in the past but wasn't there at the time of the shooting. Former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort will remain on house arrest for the time being. A federal judge kept a home confinement order for Manafort and his associate Rick Gates at a hearing this morning. 21st Century Fox is reportedly holding talks to sell most of its company to Disney. Lisa Carter has more.
CNBC is reporting that 21st Century Fox is eager to become part of a larger-scale venture to compete